The annual conservative political conference known as CPAC is currently underway in Texas, and it's going to be rocking all weekend long, everyone. Get excited. Now, if you're not familiar with CPAC, it is one of the largest and most influential right-wing conferences in the country, and it's typically a pretty good indicator of the current direction of the Republican Party and the broader American conservative movement in the moment. Which means that these days it's basically a 4-day-long MAGA rager, filled with long-winded dear leader-like speeches praising Donald Trump and discussions about the right's latest culture war issues and targets. Now, just to give you a sense of the vibes I'm talking about, here are the names of just a few of the sessions this year. Defeating communism, and we mean it. Don't Sharia my Texas. We worked on that one. Give them a button. Cigars, steaks, and ivermectin, a Maha survival guide. The president will sue you now, how the legacy media was defeated, which literally was immediately, and I love this part, and with zero hint of irony, followed by the censorship industrial complex.
All right, friends, welcome back, guys. Adam is here, so what just happened? The image of total control the White House has been projecting is cracking. Not in one place, not from one direction, but everywhere at once, simultaneously, like ice giving way. That's not political opposition. That's structural collapse. On the Senate floor, Republican lawmakers are defying their own president on matters of enormous consequence.
Today in the United States Senate, 5 Republican senators rebelled against Donald Trump and voted with the Democrats to advance a war powers resolution that would require congressional approval before Donald Trump can expand any military action in Venezuela. And Donald Trump responded the only way he knows how. On social media, Donald Trump said Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats and attempted to take away our power to fight and defend the United States of America. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, and Todd Young should never be elected to office again. That is something no other president ever says about members of his own party who cast a vote that the president doesn't like. That's a Trump thing. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky said this.
If a Congress actually had gumption or a Congress actually had wherewithal, a Congress could check a president. That's the way our founding fathers intended it to be.
In cities and towns across every single state, tens of thousands of ordinary Americans walked away from their desks and classrooms on the anniversary of Trump's return to power, making an unmistakable declaration that they will not quietly accept what is happening to their nation. Inside the House chamber itself, the resistance has become visible in ways that cannot be edited out of the broadcast.
Waterfront Park in front of the county administration building is relatively quiet now, but earlier on Tuesday it was filled here on Pacific Highway with protesters with signs and chanting against the President Trump and his administration's policies.
Hey Trump, can you hear it? Can you hear our mighty spirit?
I'm very concerned about what's going on in Minnesota.
You don't have much choice other than to find whatever available time you have and at least do something to make your voice heard.
Can you hear our mighty spirit?
I'm honored that we have so many people here today.
Hundreds of San Diegans gathering and rallying for a common cause on Tuesday afternoon, protesting against President Donald Trump and his administration as it completes its first year of Trump's second term.
We can't stop. He's not going to stop. And the people who are supporting him are not going to stop. So we don't have a choice. We have to be here.
And then there is CPAC, that peculiar gathering that functions as something between a conservative revival tent and a political fantasy convention. The usual cast of characters was present, elected Republicans rubbing shoulders with administration officials like the Justice Department's second-in-command Todd Blanche, border enforcer Tom Homan, media provocateurs like Steve Bannon. Even Enrique Tarrio, the pardoned Proud Boys leader and convicted seditionist, was spotted mingling with disgraced former Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino, the two of them grinning for a thumbs-up photograph that tells its own story about who has access to power in this moment. But here is what demands our full attention. What we are witnessing is not performative opposition theater. This goes far beyond Democrats simply playing their assigned role as the party out of power. What makes this particular chapter genuinely significant, what separates it from the usual rhythms of political conflict, is the unmistakable bipartisan nature of what is unfolding. Republican senators are breaking ranks with Trump, not one or two isolated defectors. 5 Republican senators stood with Democrats to advance legislation restricting Trump's military authority regarding Venezuela and Greenland. 52 to 47, a majority of the United States Senate, including members of his own party, declaring that the commander-in-chief needs congressional reins on his war powers. Trump's reaction to that vote, claiming it severely undermines American self-defense and national security, was effectively a confession that the blow landed hard. When a president starts labeling members of his own political tribe as disloyal threats, that is not the posture of someone firmly in command. That is the behavior of a man who senses the walls closing in, and the defiance did not end with military authorization. Late last year, 4 Republican senators, Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul, crossed Trump once again, joining Democrats to reject his emergency global tariff scheme. A 51 to 47 resolution slapping back at his aggressive use of emergency powers on trade policy. This was not their first time either. Reports noted it marked the 3rd occasion in a single week that Republicans had partnered with Democrats to push against Trump's tariff obsession. 3 separate votes in 7 days, Republican senators repeatedly rejecting their own president on what he considers his signature economic weapon. This all unfolded during the same period the Supreme Court was striking down those very same tariffs in a 6-3 ruling. So Trump found himself under simultaneous assault on the trade front from both the judicial branch and members of his own party in the upper chamber. That combination is not trivial. It represents a genuine multi-directional erosion of his capacity to act without facing consequences. Think about this for a moment. The candidate who built his entire political identity around absolute dominance and unquestioning party loyalty is now watching Republican senators repeatedly team up with Democrats to block his agenda multiple times within a single week. The image of total control is developing serious cracks. Then came the State of the Union address. The traditional evening when a president stands before a joint session of Congress and broadcasts strength, achievement, and vision to a nationwide audience. Instead of that familiar ritual of presidential majesty, Trump encountered a Democratic caucus that had clearly resolved to stop pretending. Senator Mark Warner simply walked out. His explanation was unvarnished. He said he could not remain seated while what he characterized as falsehoods poured from the podium. Other Democrats raised signs in silent protest. Some sat motionless, refusing to offer even the polite applause that decorum normally demands. Several skipped the proceedings altogether, a calculated and highly visible statement rejecting any participation in normalizing what they consider an illegitimate exercise of authority. The visual narrative playing out on national television, the vacant chairs, the handmade signs, the senator striding out of the chamber, the rows of stony faces refusing to perform respect, told a story that no words from the podium could fully erase. It told the story of a president whose opposition has reached such a breaking point that they will no longer maintain even the surface appearance of institutional deference to his presence in that hallowed room. Beyond the marble corridors of Washington, on the anniversary of Trump's 2nd inauguration, something extraordinary unfolded across the American landscape. The Free America Walkout. Citizens in every one of the 50 states leaving their workplaces and schools at 2 p.m. in a synchronized act of mass civil defiance. The organizers framed it as a protest against the administration's ICE raids, its deployment of National Guard forces in American communities, and its systematic attacks on LGBTQ rights and immigrant populations. The statement released by the movement was sharp and intentional. Faced with what they called fascism, they pledged to become ungovernable. Tens of thousands of people, 50 states, coordinated precisely on the anniversary of his return to power. That is not random venting. That is organized, sustained, strategically calibrated resistance. And it feeds directly into the broader portrait of a presidency confronting pushback not merely from political elites inside the Beltway, but from everyday Americans across the entire nation who have decided they will not quietly acquiesce to the direction their country is heading. Now we need to examine carefully what all of this actually signifies and why it matters more than the individual incidents might indicate when viewed separately. The natural tendency when reporting on events like these is to compartmentalize each one. The Senate votes become one discrete story. The State of the Union disruption becomes another. The Free America walkout gets filed as a third separate narrative. When examined in isolation, each appears notable but ultimately manageable, the kind of political turbulence a skilled administration could weather and move beyond. But when you assemble these pieces and examine them as elements of a single emerging pattern, the composite image they create becomes genuinely threatening to the narrative of absolute control this White House has worked so hard to project. Begin with the Republican Senate defections because these represent the most immediately consequential political development in the entire landscape. When Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell, and Rand Paul vote against Trump on his emergency tariff agenda, these are not spontaneous or impulsive acts. These are four of the most politically seasoned senators in the Republican conference. Collins and Murkowski have spent years navigating the tension between their moderate-leaning constituents and the demands Trump places upon them. McConnell's tangled history with Trump stretches back years and includes some of the most bitter public ruptures in modern Republican politics. Paul's libertarian-inflected opposition to executive overreach on emergency powers and war authority aligns perfectly with his long-established ideological commitments. These four senators crossing Trump repeatedly within a compressed time frame is neither coincidence nor rebellion for its own gratification. It signals that a floor exists beneath which Trump's capacity to command automatic Republican compliance in the Senate simply does not extend. And that floor is being tested with increasing regularity. The war powers votes deserve particular scrutiny because they connect to something genuinely alarming that has been simmering beneath the surface of the daily news cycle. The vote where 5 Republicans joined Democrats to advance legislation restraining Trump's military authority over Venezuela and Greenland did not occur in isolation. It unfolded against a backdrop of escalating presidential rhetoric about employing military force in ways that made even members of his own party profoundly uneasy. The Greenland situation, where Trump has issued increasingly aggressive statements about American acquisition of the territory, including through military means if necessary, is precisely the sort of scenario that genuinely frightens senators across the partisan divide. The implications of a president unilaterally deciding to use armed force to seize territory from a NATO ally are nearly too severe to fully process. The Venezuela question raises similar concerns about unauthorized military deployment lacking congressional approval. So when 5 Republican senators vote to apply legislative brakes to those military designs, they are not simply making a political gesture. They are responding to a genuine and documented anxiety that this president's martial ambitions have outpaced any coherent legal or constitutional justification. The 52-47 tally demonstrates something worth emphasizing. A majority of the United States Senate, a majority that includes members of Trump's own political party, is stating that his military moves require restraint. That is not nothing. That is authentic constitutional pushback from within the legislative branch. Now consider the State of the Union walkout and what it reveals about the evolution of Democratic strategy. Senator Warner exiting the chamber and publicly declaring he could not endure what he characterized as falsehoods represents a deliberate escalation in how Democrats are choosing to engage with this presidency. For an extended period, there was an internal debate within the Democratic Party about the proper approach to Trump's public appearances. Do you attend and participate in the standard institutional ceremonies because that is what your constitutional role demands? Or do you leverage those moments of maximum national visibility to register your opposition in the most conspicuous manner possible? The Warner walkout and the wider pattern of Democratic disruption during the State of the Union offer an unambiguous answer to that debate. They have concluded that normalized participation in Trump's presidential pageantry, when they believe that pageantry serves to propagate what Warner termed falsehoods, constitutes a form of complicity. Consequently, they are selecting disruption, visible, camera-ready, nationally televised disruption. This functions effectively as a communication strategy because the images of empty Democratic seats, raised protest signs, and a departing senator compete directly with whatever message Trump is delivering from the podium for the attention of the viewing audience. You cannot fully command the visual narrative of your own State of the Union when the opposition is making its defiance this visually explicit. That presents a communications challenge for any White House attempting to project strength and normalcy. The Free America Walkout represents something distinct from both the congressional resistance and the Senate defection votes. It embodies the grassroots organizing dimension of the opposition that is coalescing around this presidency. Tens of thousands of participants across all 50 states. That level of national synchronization does not materialize organically or by accident. It demands months of preparation, network construction, communication systems, and strategic forethought. The fact that organizers successfully executed a truly nationwide walkout on the anniversary of Trump's inauguration indicates that a serious and well-resourced organizing infrastructure is being assembled in opposition to this administration. The declaration promising ungovernability carries a very specific political meaning. It is not merely expressing dissent. It is committing to a particular form of sustained, disruptive resistance explicitly patterned on historical civil disobedience movements. Organizers who deploy language of that nature are signaling to both their participants and the administration they oppose that this is not a standalone event. It represents the opening phase of a sustained campaign. The timing, deliberately pegged to the inauguration anniversary, signals that this resistance intends to organize its calendar around Trump's calendar, weaponizing his own symbolic dates against him. Here is the connection that binds all these elements together most forcefully. The Senate defections, the State of the Union protests, the Free America Walkout, the ongoing impeachment activity, the court defeats and appeal denials. All of these phenomena are feeding one another in a mutually reinforcing cycle. When Republican senators observe tens of thousands of people walking out across all 50 states on the inauguration anniversary, it alters their political calculus regarding the risk of breaking with Trump on specific votes. When Democratic senators witness their colleagues walking out of the State of the Union and generating massive media attention and social media engagement, it emboldens increasingly visible displays of resistance. When grassroots organizers see Republican senators voting against Trump on war powers and tariffs, it validates their argument that the resistance is producing tangible political results and that sustained pressure is effective. These are not separate, disconnected incidents. They constitute a developing ecosystem of opposition that is becoming more organized, more coordinated, and more politically effective with each passing month. That is the deeper story beneath all the individual headlines, and it carries genuine importance. The Trump administration's response to this constellation of challenges has followed a predictable but revealing pattern. Fury directed at the disloyal Republicans who crossed them on war powers and tariffs. Dismissiveness toward the State of the Union protests, characterizing them as mere partisan theater. Attacks on the credibility and motivations of the organizers behind the Free America Walkout. What the administration has conspicuously not done is make any strategic adjustments to reduce the political pressure it continues to generate. No outreach to the Republican senators who broke ranks to understand their concerns and identify common ground. No acknowledgement that the scale of street-level protest represents an authentic political problem demanding a substantive response. The instinct remains fixed on doubling down, attacking the opposition, and projecting unshaken confidence. That instinct might have functioned during the first term, when the resistance was more fragmented and less coordinated. But the opposition in this second term presents differently. It is more synchronized. It manifests in more locations simultaneously, and it is producing real, measurable political outcomes in the form of Senate votes that go against the president. Dismissing all of this with outrage and counterattacks is not a strategy. It is a reflex, and reflexes do not resolve structural political problems. Here are the essential takeaways from everything we have been examining, because several dynamics are shaping the political terrain heading into the coming year in ways that will matter tremendously. The Republican Senate defections on war powers and tariffs constitute the most politically significant element of this entire narrative and warrant far more attention than they are currently receiving. When Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul crossed Trump on emergency tariffs multiple times within a single week, and when 5 Republicans joined Democrats on the military authorization vote, these are not merely symbolic gestures. Those votes carry genuine consequences. The tariff rebuke votes form part of the broader pattern of congressional and judicial pushback against Trump's emergency powers agenda, the same agenda the Supreme Court later invalidated with its 6-3 ruling. The war powers vote represents direct legislative constraint on presidential military authority. The political significance of Republican senators demonstrating willingness to do this repeatedly and publicly lies in establishing that Trump does not possess unconditional command of his own party in the Senate. A limit exists. It remains narrow and applies only to specific extreme overreaches, but it exists. And the existence of that limit will matter increasingly as senators in competitive states begin calculating whether total allegiance to Trump represents the safest political position for their own re-election prospects. The Free America Walkout and the broader Grassroots organizing it represent signals that opposition to Trump in this second term is more sophisticated and durable than what he encountered previously. The initial resistance wave was largely reactive, driven by outrage at particular policies and events, and struggled to translate street energy into sustained political organization. What is developing now appears fundamentally different. The Free America Walkout was planned for a symbolic date. It was coordinated across all 50 states. It employed the language of ungovernability, which signals a specific and historically grounded theory of political change through sustained civil disobedience rather than isolated protest events. And it is happening alongside, not instead of, formal political organizing through congressional pressure campaigns and electoral infrastructure development. The combination of street-level mass mobilization and formal political channel organizing is historically the most effective form of opposition movement building. That combination appears to be developing right now, and it will constitute a significant political force in competitive districts and states across the country. The State of the Union protests and walkouts are components of a deliberate Democratic communication strategy designed to deny Trump the uncontested presidential imagery he craves and requires. Every time a senator walks out and explains why on camera, it creates a competing narrative to whatever message emerged from the podium. Every sign raised by a Democratic representative becomes a social media clip that travels independently of the full address. Every vacant seat on the Democratic side delivers a visual statement about the condition of this presidency without requiring a single word of explanation. Democrats have determined that the method for combating Trump's mastery of political imagery and narrative is to inject visible disruption into the moments he most desires to control. The State of the Union is the most widely viewed political event of the year. Transforming it into a spectacle of Democratic protest and Republican unease rather than a seamless presidential showcase constitutes a strategic choice, and it is functioning as a strategy because the images from those protests traveled more widely on social media after the address than any of his prepared remarks. That is actually a sophisticated communications maneuver. The cumulative effect of all this resistance, the Senate defections, the walkouts, the mass protests, the court defeats, the impeachment resolutions, is gradually chipping away at the single most valuable political asset Trump has always relied upon above everything else, the aura of invincibility, the perception that opposing Trump is politically futile because he invariably wins, invariably survives, invariably emerges strengthened. That aura is what keeps Republican senators aligned even when they privately disagree. That aura is what suppresses opposition organizing because why invest time and resources in fighting someone who seems unbeatable? Every crack in that aura, every Republican senator who votes against him without suffering immediate political destruction, every mass protest demonstrating that opposition remains alive and organized, every court ruling rejecting his agenda, makes it incrementally easier for the next person to take the next step of visible resistance. The aura of invincibility does not shatter in a single dramatic moment. It erodes gradually through the accumulation of visible defeats and visible resistance that does not get crushed. And that erosion is precisely what is occurring right now across multiple fronts simultaneously. What should we watch for going forward? First, monitor whether additional Republican senators follow the lead of Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul in breaking with Trump on specific issues. The more this occurs without political catastrophe for those who do it, the more normalized the behavior becomes and the more accessible it becomes to others. Second, observe whether the grassroots organizing infrastructure being constructed through events like the Free America Walkout translates into electoral infrastructure, volunteer networks, donor engagement, and voter registration that manifests in the coming primaries and general elections. Third, pay close attention to how Trump responds to the Republican defections specifically. Does he attempt to primary the senators who cross him? Does he escalate rhetorical attacks? Does he find mechanisms to pressure them back into alignment? His response to the defections will reveal much about whether he still possesses the political instruments to enforce party discipline, or whether that enforcement capacity is weakening. Here is the fundamental reality. Trump entered this second term projecting total dominance, total party control, total command of the political environment. What is actually occurring is that on multiple fronts simultaneously, the dominance is proving less than absolute. Republican senators are voting against him on war powers and tariffs. Democratic lawmakers are walking out of his State of the Union on national television. Tens of thousands of people across all 50 states are organizing coordinated acts of civil resistance on the anniversary of his inauguration. Courts at every level are denying his emergency appeals and striking down his most aggressive executive actions. None of these developments individually ends his presidency or destroys his political power. But together, they narrate a story about a presidency confronting organized, multi-front, increasingly sophisticated resistance from the Senate floor to the streets of every state in America. The crumbling is real, the resistance is real. And heading into the coming election cycle, both of those realities will matter enormously. Stay alert because the next wave of Republican defections and the next major protest mobilization are already being planned. When they arrive together, the political impact will exceed anything we have witnessed so far.